this is in as much a review for myself so that I can quickly go back to it, as also sharing with anybody that's interested just my notes on how to avoid a climate disaster by Bill Gates. So one of the first things he said was that he divested all of, because he has investments, and back in 2019 he divested in anything that is oil or carbon gases emitting investments. In oil and gas, basically, that's what he divested in. Another thing he said that actually not all gases affect the environment the same way. So for instance, carbon dioxide doesn't, we use carbon dioxide equivalents to account for the fact that some gases trap more heat than carbon dioxide but don't stay around as long. Unfortunately, carbon dioxide equivalents are imperfect in measure. Ultimately, what really matters isn't the amount of greenhouse gas emissions. What matters is the higher temperatures and their impact on humans. And on that front, a gas like methane is much worse than carbon dioxide because it drives the temperature up immediately and by quite a bit. So that's really interesting when taking into account what type of gases they're going out there. And let's quickly move on. I'm only going to talk about the most important things. He says reliable, clean energy. So even though we might be having innovation in like different technology, if still the electricity that is, for the cars, that it's amazing that we have electric cars. However, where is the electricity clean? Because otherwise, it has to be clean energy going into the clean car. If not, it makes no sense. The main culprit isn't carbon dioxide, but methane, which causes 28 times more warming per molecule than carbon dioxide. Again, that's in farming, how we grow things and meat, and that's why actually having a more vegetarian vegan diet actually makes more sense, because basically, like chicken, you need 2 units of energy going into the chicken to grow the chicken for 1 unit of energy that you'd get out by eating the chicken. Pigs is 4, so the pigs eat a lot of energy, meaning a lot of what they eat, and they expel 2 units for 1 unit of energy, I believe. And cows are the worst because they eat a lot. They ingest 6 units of energy for just 1 unit of energy, so it just makes no sense. Whereas you could have the same area used to grow crops that feed tons of people, you're using it just to feed animals that provide less unit per energy. So that's how it wouldn't make sense. And as Bill Gates said in his documentary on Netflix, Decoding Bill's Brain, I think it is, he's like, I'm not here to be inspirational, I'm here to make the world more efficient. And that's one way of looking at it, how to make the world more efficient, how to allow humans to survive, because the planet is still going to exist, whether as humans we we kill ourselves basically with the greenhouse gases or not. And that also there's going to be an asymmetrical so basically, like, the people that live from the land and the people that have less economical resources are the ones that are going to be more affected by more extreme cases of weather, but also because there's going to be less resources, like if and the people are going to be displaced, and so actually the government is going to suffer a lot. So it makes sense that we all take care of the world and of humanity now, rather than pay the consequences later. Because obviously, as we know, person that takes care of the health, and if the government provides like programs to be healthy, whether it's healthy food and exercise and promoting exercise and all these things, those prevent illnesses, and prevention is less costly than paying up for the consequences later. So that's what he is saying as well. He was like, if you look at it from a financial point of view, it makes sense to take care of things now and like prepare for the eventual like flooding of certain areas, versus having to pay up the consequences. And he was saying, how Puerto Rico just had had the Maria, the hurricane, and so he was saying like how more frequent and how more dangerous all these freak storms will happen, and how much they'll affect the people, and how much it will cost. And he was saying, is it yeah, so it's how much it'll cost to rebuild everything for then to come on another hurricane. Okay. A heat pump, that was really interesting idea, that basically like there's this machine that you put in your house, so that the same thing in a fridge. He was saying, you know how when you stand close to a fridge it's kind of warm on the outside, it's because there's a sort of a heat pump. I don't understand the mechanics of it, but that's how he explained it. So the fridge in the inside it maintains cold, which is the same thing as AC. He said, you know, one of the largest producers of greenhouse gases that we have as humans is the AC. So he was like, why not just have a heat pump? So I thought that was quite interesting, really. And there's, as consumers, obviously we have purchasing power to decide actually what, you know, if in the end companies are just trying to make money, right? And if the tastes of the consumers change, then the companies will change. So he does talk a lot in this book about green premium and how certain green or eco-friendly inventions and products are more expensive nowadays because it takes more technology to develop them, and they're not widespread at the moment. So the more widespread they are, the green premium goes down and they're more affordable. Like how there was a Chinese company that is producing tons of electric buses. That way now electric buses for public transport are way more accessible all over the world because there's a mass production. But also what the government can do is use part of the budget of the government to invest in research and development, knowing that some of those companies that are producing new innovations and technologies will fail. However, it is important, and that's what he's saying, he's taking the risk because it's worth it. As climates gets warmer, droughts and floods will become more frequent, wiping out harvests more often. Livestock eat less and produce less meat and milk. The air and soil lose moisture, leaving less water available for plants. In South Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa, tens of millions of acres of farmland will become substantially drier. Crop-eating pests are already infesting more acreage as they find more hospitable environments to live in. The growing season will grow shorter. At 4 degrees Celsius of warming, most of Sub-Saharan Africa could see it shrink by 20% or more. So when you're already living on the edge, any of one of these changes could be disastrous. And if you don't have any money saved up and your crops die off, you can't go buy more seeds. Basically, another idea that I found fascinating was that in the Ice Age, compared to the temperature we have now, there is, guess how many degrees of Celsius there was in difference. Yeah, he does mention Celsius a lot in this book because that's how the rest of the world kind of talks about temperature. Just kidding. Yeah, 6 degrees difference between an ice age and where we are right now. I thought it would be around like 20 degrees, you know, something insanely substantial. But that just makes us understand how, you know, by saying that there's a 4-degree difference, shifting 20% of the Sub-Saharan Africa's, you know, productivity in terms of food, then what we're talking about is huge. It's a huge change that everyone's going to feel it, except obviously in not obviously, but I'm saying in the more developed countries, then people will have the ability to just get better AC or move to a colder region to have a more comfortable life. But, you know, the people that don't have a chance to do that, that's why we have to protect each other, basically. With growing food scarcity, more kids won't get all the nutrients they need, weakening their body's natural defenses and making them much more likely to die of diarrhea, malaria, or pneumonia. And like coming from Peru, I already see this, that there's already people that don't have enough food, and if you don't get enough food in the first and nutrients in the first 2 years of your life, then that just sort of damages your brain, supposedly science says, for the rest of your life. And so it's just those first 2 years is so critical for the rest of their life development. So it is important, and solutions and innovations and new ideas and creativity are not only, you know, in the developed countries, and they're not only in the, you know, most elite schools by any means. They ideas can come from anywhere, from any corner of the world, from any single person. That's why we all need to protect each other and nurture each other and help each other grow, in the sense that way we will have more ideas and more creativity and more innovation and actually improve the living condition of the whole world. And wouldn't that be amazing? And obviously that would cause more costs. If there's more people ill, then the government would have to pay more for public health, which, if there are going to be so many natural disasters plus bad health of the population, then we can see how it's like adding up, and it's more and more expensive. Help farmers manage the risks from more chaotic weather. For example, governments can help farmers grow a wide variety of crops and livestock, so one setback doesn't wipe the other one out. For instance, if there's like pests. Explore strengthening social security systems and arranging for weather-based agriculture insurance that help farmers recover from the losses. Focus on the most vulnerable people. Female farmers, this is key, have it even harder than men. They may not be able to secure land rights, for example, or have equal access to water, or get financing to buy fertilizer, like loans from banks, and may not even be allowed to get the weather forecast. And so we need to promote women's property rights as farmers. And one study by the UN agency found that if women had the same access to resources as men, they could grow 20 to 30% more food on their farms and reduce the number of hungry people in the world from 12 to 17%. That's the number of hungry people in the world. Okay, we need to get on top of this. And climate proofing buildings, for instance, encouraging people to relocate permanently from areas that are no longer viable. And that's incredibly hard, because you're telling, there's families that have lived there for generations upon generations upon generations, and then you're suddenly telling them like they have to leave because it's not sustainable anymore. Next is preparing and responding for emergencies. We need a recovery period to help the people that have been displaced. Coastal cities will have the worst problems. Hundreds of millions of people will be forced from their homes. And by the middle of the century, the cost of climate change to all coastal cities could exceed $1 trillion each year. And that's why he's saying that it's important to prepare, not so that's to mitigate the cost on the other side of the situation. Build and expand seawalls, protect themselves from storms that are getting more and more violent, shore up stormwater drainage systems, and raise wharves so that they stay above the rising tides. Renovating infrastructures. We should shore up our natural defenses. And I love this idea. As forests store and regulate water, wetlands prevent floods and provide water for farmers and cities. Coral reefs are home to fish that coastal communities depend for food. And this is a picture of the planting mangrove trees being a great investment, because they help prevent some $80 billion a year in terms of losses from floods. So they sort of like hold everything together and make sure that it doesn't flood in. It's insane. Cheaper than building breakwaters, and the trees also improve the water quality. I mean, in Bill Gates' word, it's a great investment. Reclaiming wastewater to just-in-time irrigation. And what he says is like, you can flood-proof your business now, but it might not get hit by a big deluge for the next 10 to 20 years. So he is saying is like, have faith that what you're doing in protecting yourself, even if you don't see the benefit of protecting yourself in the next, like, say 5 years, it is important, and you will be better in the long run as well. Creating early warning system, climate resilient infrastructure, raising crop yields, managing water, protecting mangroves, found that investing $1.8 trillion between 2020 and 2030 would return more than $7 trillion in benefits. To put that into perspective, as spread out over a decade, it's about 0.2% of the world's GDP, with nearly a fourfold return on investment. So just on financial terms, aside from talking about saving human lives and making the world a more, saving human lives, it's also very financially sane. Civil wars that don't need to break out over, so you can measure the benefits in terms of bad things that don't happen. Civil wars wouldn't happen in terms of fighting over water resources. Farmers don't get wiped out by drought or flood. Cities that don't get destroyed by hurricanes, and waves of people that don't become climate refugees. Children who grow up with nutrients they need. That's the positives. Families who escape poverty and join the global middle class, which is what we want, because they have more purchasing power, spending power. Businesses and cities and countries that thrive even as the climate gets hotter. And we have done a great deal of progress overall. Climate scientists have identified many tipping points that could dramatically increase the rate at which climate change happens. For instance, if the ice-like crystalline structures containing large amounts of, this is terrible, methane on the floor become unstable and erupt, in relatively short time, disasters could strike around the world, overwhelming our attempts to prepare for and respond to climate change. So what he's saying is that even though we are measuring climate change shift and we're saying, oh, like, let's prepare for 2050 as zero net emissions, you know, he is saying that there could be one of these freak accidents where, you know, climate change just shifts overnight, and we wouldn't be prepared for that, but at least we would finally understand the importance of it and move towards it, you know. But he says, like, prepare, because climate change might not just be a faraway thing, it could be something that just happens overnight as well. Geoengineering is a way of putting some particles up in the atmosphere so that not so much heat goes into the planet, but it's geoengineering and some people are against it. It's talking about air pollution and how that's really bad for, obviously, health, and it is a major cause of illness and death, and it likely kills more than 7 million people per year. Like, we're talking about COVID, why, you know, whereas living in cities like London is terrible, and Beijing, but even though Beijing has reported a 35% decline in certain types of pollution. So there are some, and obviously the government needs to get involved in order to do things like clean acts. Okay. He says, mind the investment gap. Yes, some ideas will not pay out. An externality, an expense that's borne by society rather than the person or business who's responsible for it. Meaning that, like, you know, if all developing countries, you know, agree on not producing carbon emissions, but then, you know, some developing countries continue to do so, then like, it's not like the air above the UK is going to be super clean and the air above, let's say, Peru, I'm just saying because I'm from there, then the air above Peru is toxic and the air above the UK is clean. No, because obviously, as we know, the air travels. So it is something that I think in the best case scenario, it is something that unites the whole of humanity, and we stop you know, seeing so many divisions. And also, just talking about social media for a second, like, social media is run by AI, by bots, right, who want the most engagement possible, and they realize that the most engagement is achieved through tribalizing, which means that make people form tiny groups, and, you know, and so that, you know, they're more divided to extremes, which we have seen, you know, so many riots and stuff like that. And so obviously there are some things that need to change in society, but that, you know, it's just social media is like exaggerating it to the point where, like, we are less different than it's being painted to do so. And I think that fighting together climate change is something that could potentially build bonds throughout the world. Solar industry, solutions vary from place to place. We need to store it. So he does go into the problems of having the costs, high costs and green premium. And so he was saying that the government needs to put some carbon tax on companies that are using a lot of carbon, or producing a lot of carbon, sorry. But I think actually it might be even more interesting to have, as he puts it, what is it? Like, giving a prize to companies that are more eco-friendly, or at least subsidizing maybe some parts of clean energy, so that, you know, it's an incentive for companies to be more eco-friendly. Bridge political divides, compelled to speak out, time and energy supporting whatever you're in favor for than opposing what you're against. When we have a fact-based worldview, we can see that the world is not as bad as it seems, and we can see what we have to do to keep making it better. So, okay, sometimes people get like super emotional for things, and that's okay and acceptable, but at the same time, if we switch our energies to, like, okay, this sucks, how can we make it better, rather than just focusing how it sucks. It's like we're like being proactive about making change that truly can have an impact. He says, I'm an optimist because I know what technology can accomplish, and because I know what people can accomplish. China committed to the ambitious goal of being carbon neutral by 2060. and there has to be international cooperation. Helping others is not just an act of altruism, it's also in our self-interest. We all have reasons to get to zero and help others to do it. Temperatures will not stop rising in Texas until emissions stop rising in India. Strengthening health systems around the world, the more prepared we will be for the next pandemic. Energy transition will be disruptive for the communities that rely on the energy systems. How cement is made, steel is smelted, or cars are manufactured. And there's jobs that indirectly rely on this industry, so we need a transition plan. So this is just very, 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 very helpful. There's so much information as what we can do as consumers, as civilians, and also what the government can do. So I highly recommend it. It's a really nice read. And thank you for tuning in and for listening. And if you found that interesting, cool. It's also just so that hopefully I'll be able to review it when I'm like, oh, what did that book have to say about? Okay.